Hello, everyone. My name is Garvin, and I read things and talk about them on the internet for your entertainment. So, this week, I got kind of a treat for everyone. I have a pair of real biologists, Dr. Allen, who also was an editor back when I just did textbook reviews. He's more than happy to join us today. Go ahead and say hi, Dr. Allen. Excuse me.
Hello, you almost called me Mister.
I did. I
How dare you?
apologize. That's my fault. That's
That's all right.
yeah. For
I
the
don't
record.
usually correct people.
Yeah, for the record, that's because I knew Dr. Allen before he was a doctor, so old habits die hard. Um, we also have with us Mr. Davis, who, for disclosure, is a patron of this channel. So, Mr. Davis, thank you for your support. He's also a marine biologist, and he teaches high school science. And this is right up his alley because he teaches a lot of ecology and biology. So that's why he's here. Uh, Dr. Davis has his PhD in biology.
Oh, Dr.
Not a
Davis.
doctor.
Yeah,
You meant
gentlemen,
Dr. Allen, right?
I
Because you
did
said
mean
Dr.
Dr.
Davis.
Allen. The,
He's gonna be doing this all night.
I
It's
yeah,
know.
okay.
yeah. You know what? I'm not gonna force a retake. We're just gonna go with it, folks. So
No, yeah, just roll with it.
Yep.
We're doing it live.
we're doing this live, folks. Gentlemen, anything you'd like to add to your introductions?
Um, okay, so I'm a medical entomologist and vector ecologist by training. Um, and I really love parasites. So let's do this.
All right, Mr. Davis, anything before you start us off?
I teach college level environmental science, which has a huge component of ecology. And interestingly enough, this coincides exactly with what I'm going over this Friday, 3 days from now or so. And so this is right in line with what I'm talking about anyway. And unfortunately, most of the pictures you're going to see are my vacation photos because I drag my family around and make them let me take pictures of moss on rocks and things like that. Because, yeah.
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 Oh yeah.
Just
Also
for
worth noting,
go ahead.
we all have dogs and they will bark. They're just
s-
that way. You'll have
So
to deal with it.
so noted. Just for the record, folks, neither one of these gentlemen have had a chance to read the book yet. There's a full review from me in the description that you can go to. So they're going off of a document wrote up for them on the Kraken's life cycle. So any mistakes are my fault. Just want to make that clear. All right. Uh, Mr. Davis, you're going to start us off by talking about what is ecological succession, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what a pioneer species is, right?
Yep. I can definitely do that for you.
All
The
right.
two are intertwined, so it flows right one into the other. Okay.
Yep, sounds good. Go ahead and start us off.
All right. So I'm going to provide you guys with a little bit of visuals. Garvin, if you want to take a look at this, because this is new hat for you. What we're going to look at here is basically a diagram of ecological succession, and it's simply defined as the process of change and replacement of species in a community. And every time you have a new community coming in, it usually makes it harder for the previous one to survive. So this is a progress from, in some cases, bare rock all the way up to a mature and developed forest called a climax community. And I think it's worthwhile mentioning what a climax community is as well, because that is a fully developed biome. That is what the ecosystem will generally be until some kind of disturbance happens. And that disturbance can take a lot of forms: fire, flood, tornado, or could be man-made even with logging or other things like that. Um, there are two kinds of ecological succession, and the first one is primary succession. Now, in the document you gave me, you indicated that this is after a tsunami, which could cause a type of ecological succession. It wouldn't destroy everything, but it would remove the majority of living biomass and knock down most of the plant communities. So that would be something. If you had a situation where, because you mentioned that this planet is like super volcanically active, right?
Yeah, it's very active. And now the characters have only been interacting with this planet for a short term, but they do note a high level of activity, and their theory is that these tsunamis happen um, on a fairly regular basis, and the fact that the species are very adapted to it in that area seems to bear that out.
Okay, so that could be a factor. Um,
That
so
would not be primary succession, though. That would be
secondary.
secondary. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got primary succession here, and so originally when I saw that it was volcanically active, I was thinking, well, you'd expect a primary succession, which is what you can see in the lower left-hand corner. That is a picture I took down in the basin of a volcano in Volcanoes National Park in Hawaii. And if you have an environment that has a lot of water and you've got volcanic rock that's basically just bare rock, then mosses and lichens can actually break that down relatively quickly, sometimes in just a matter of a couple of decades. So you can already see like there's some small trees growing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look to the right and to the top of this image here, these are pictures from Craters of the Moon National Park in Idaho. This has not seen a volcanic eruption in more than 5,000 years, and it is still largely bare rock due to the lack of water mostly and cold
Hmm.
temperatures in the winter as well. And you can see on this far right, those are actually several species of lichen there. So you've got dark black ones, you've got the green ones, and lichen are going to be your most common primary succession species because they are a symbiotic relationship between an algae and a fungus, and they're actually able to break down rock and start the process to make things available for other organisms. And that's really the key thing about a pioneer species. So in secondary succession, which is kind of what I think is more going on here, those are going to take some different forms. So this is Mesa Verde National Park. I told you I go all over the national park system to just take pictures of succession. And on the left-hand side this time, you can see some small trees starting to grow in the ashes of a forest fire. So primary succession is blank rock. Secondary succession is more like what you'd see in a situation with a tsunami, and you would most likely have either simple grasses or simple plants. But the characteristic here is they are going to grow really, really fast, and they can set up without needing any other organisms for support. All right.
Hmm.
In addition to that, you can actually see several stages of succession here in the other picture, where in the foreground, that's the most recent fire, less than 10 years ago. And then as you move further back, you can see the larger trees. That is the oldest one. And then there's kind of a middle section back there as well. These are three different fires that all triggered succession. So in secondary succession, fire is the most common form that we'll have here in North America. But you can have like a lot of different stuff cause this. And your first year or so after the fire, you will get your pioneer species, which are usually annual plants. And then after that, you'll get perennials, which are plants that stick around for more than 1 year. You don't replant them every year. And then you start getting larger shrubs and small trees, and those will shade the ground and actually make it harder for grasses to grow. And then eventually you get up to these mature shade-tolerant trees that are able to grow and develop over long periods of time in the shade, assuming you're building towards a forest biome. Um, they have similarities, but the key difference is primary succession starts with bare rock and it requires weathering. And then again, more mosses and lichens up there in the corner, and you can see all the different colors. Each color is a different one. Secondary, you still have soil present, so in honesty, it's basically weeds. If you can imagine the front yard, if we're not pulling the weeds or taking care of it, that's actually primary succession.
Well,
If you got
my
a
backyard for
yard,
that matter,
hmm?
Say
or
again,
my
Doc.
backyard for that matter. My
Yeah,
backyard, for instance, I let it grow wild intentionally.
yeah. I'm thinking more Arizona, where a lot of times we have the bare rocks and stuff like that. And right before a home sells, what they'll do is go through and take a flamethrower to anything that's growing and dump a ton of Weed Be Gone or Roundup or a combination of the two, so that when the house is sitting on the market, it doesn't grow weeds. And then after a year or so, once the soil's flushed, you'll suddenly get weeds everywhere. So
Yeah.
that's a good example, actually, of primary succession. Or if you can imagine a bare lot after a building is torn down, this can happen anywhere. So the last thing I want to show you, the last one I want to show you guys here is that this is a really important thing, is that any ecosystem, you have species that occupy a really specific niche. What it does, what it eats, what physical locations it occupies, and what resources it can use. This kraken sounds like it is actually highly specialized. It needs large, complex prey in order to house that. So it's more like the stuff on the far left side of the screen where you can see I've got a picture of a koala looking stunned. That is like the ultimate specialist species, only can eat one thing, needs a super niche habitat, right? But lichens, which are a pioneer species, are also very niche. So those two pictures that I've got there, those were both taken at Tonto Natural Bridge here in Arizona. The green ones that you can see in the slightly lower picture, those are adapted for growing in a shaded environment with a lot more moisture. You find those under the bridge. Whereas the red and black ones on the other rocks, those are more UV tolerant and need less water. So even in your succession, your succession species, your pioneer species, a lot of times they actually have extremely specialized environments. Whereas pioneer species, in secondary succession, they have a tendency to be more generalist, and a great example of that is a dandelion. They'll grow anywhere. If you want a vertebrate example, coyotes. All right, but usually speaking, when we're looking at succession, something to keep in mind is a lot of times in primary succession, you do have the highly specialized lichens, but then in secondary succession, you're going to get a lot more generalist. And these are general rules. And as I always tell my students, if you find a rule in biology, you're going to find an exception to it also. Okay? It is a super squishy science, and there's always these yes, but then also. I mean, again, we can't even agree on a good definition for fish that doesn't include humans. So there you go.
Which just means humans are fish. They're just highly derived fish.
Yeah, and then trying to say, hey, I would like to, have fish versus something else, it becomes tricky then. So fish isn't a kingdom, but it makes it difficult. And that's my point, is that, this is all conjecture. I'm talking about the rules for Earth, and this is a science fiction fantasy novel. So honestly, the author can make up whatever they want. The only really egregious sin is everything being described is not the terminology I would use to describe a pioneer species. So
not by a long shot. And even in a secondary succession situation, you've got to keep in mind those plants were kind of already there. A lot of those annual or perennial plants, they seed bank, so they're just hanging around waiting for some kind of disturbance to come along so they can start germinating again.
Again, that is possible. They can also be blown in by wind. When you're dealing with the almost sterilization of the soil, it's a little different, because I'm looking at fires, like the super involved fires and stuff. One thing that is important to note is that in any issue where you have a disturbance of an environment and succession, the more diverse the ecosystems are surrounding the area disturbed, the faster it will recover. So disturbance and succession can happen on an extremely small scale as well, which could be as simple as a tornado touches down and clears, 100 meters of space. Or heck, some argue that a large tree falling in a dense forest triggers a form of succession. So
absolutely,
this is one of those, when you have a ecosystem and you're dealing with secondary succession, very rarely is it there's nothing around for recolonization to happen. So yeah.
Okay. And you can also get forms, Marcus, you stop that. You can also get long form, even in a climax community, you can get forms of succession that take place over long time spans. I'm thinking the succession of a river basin, because as a river meanders, you create oxbow lakes, and those eventually sediment in.
Yes.
And that just cycles across an entire landscape.
Okay.
Beaver dams are another good example of that kind of thing in an aquatic situation, in an aquatic environments.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so let me just say thank you both of you for that. We're gonna go ahead and move on to the Kraken itself. Um, I'm just gonna kind of hit the high points of its life cycle for the audience, just in case anyone didn't read the review. That way everyone knows what we're gonna be talking about here. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right, so the Kraken of Eden. Eden is another planet. In the book, it is the first planet with a complex ecology discovered by humanity, not counting the planet Earth. Um, it starts its life, has a spore about 5 microns wide. I'm going to ask you guys about that later. Um, and due to the fact that Eden has a much wider variety of biochemistry in its life, I'm not going to go into details there. Just be aware it has more variety in its biochemistry than Earth does. These spores are very adaptive. When they hit a host that they can adapt to its biochemistry, the spore infects it with parasitic worms. The worms uh, basically eat the host from inside out, and they take a while to do so, several days. They start with the fat reserves, uh, and then they move on to muscle, and then finally eat the organs. So they keep the host alive as long as possible. The worms also reproduce asexually. Uh, the book referred to them as haploid. Is that how I pronounce it?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
All right. Once they reach a certain size, they create a sort of bone-like cyst that pushes out through the host's skin, and after a certain period, the kraken hatches into its next form, which is a giant sort of beaked crab monster. It has a pair of pincher-like claws, 4 limbs for moving, and 6 sensory clusters along its back. It also has a 3-split beak with rasping tongues. So when it catches you with its claws, it doesn't bite you, it tears flesh off of you with its bladed tongues. So it also will keep you alive as long as possible while eating you, uh, which is terrifying. Um, in this form, it also has the ability to create an electromagnetic field, which does affect brain function. So it can kind of stupefy prey, and it does this to humans. Uh, the Kraken are cannibalistic. They spread out. They kill and eat everything they can until they reach a certain size. Um, at that point, they seek each other out to mate. They're hermaphrodites, so mating fertilizes both partners. They are promiscuous, so they will mate with more than one partner and carry young from all matings. Um, the uh, offspring of those mating are in the book referred to as diploid. Is that how I say it?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
that
Yep.
would be correct.
All right. And what's interesting is they have a specialized wound where each genetically identical cluster of offspring has a umbilical cord that branches out to each one. If the parent can't catch enough prey to feed all the offspring, excuse me, the offspring will turn to other genetic uh, clusters and start killing and eating each other. So the different genetic groups are competing even inside the womb. Um, at a certain point, when the offspring reach the a certain size, their parent finds a dark, quiet place, passes out, and the offspring eat their way out. These offsprings are referred to as dragons because they have a more upright posture, they have clawed feet, and they don't have pincher claws, they have wings. So in their smaller sizes, they can fly, but if they keep eating, they grow too big and too heavy to fly because Eden has a comparable gravity to Earth, so there is a limit there. Um, they will also cannibalize each other and hunt down other genetic groups if there's a lack of other prey. And once they hit a certain size, they explode into spores, thus starting the whole cycle over again. So since we had Mr. Davis primarily leading us through ecological succession, I'm going to ask Dr. Allen to take the lead on there. And I mean, first of all, can you kind of the 5 microns? Can you give us an idea of what size that actually would be in real world terms?
Like, oh, good God.
Microscopic.
Yeah, yeah,
So
incredibly tiny.
okay.
Um, so size of a pollen grain, effectively, would
Oh
be
wow.
about the
Yeah.
right size, I believe.
Yeah.
Um,
It's about twice as large as the cold virus. It's about
yeah.
twice the size of
Oh,
the
yeah.
virus for the common
That's
cold.
Oh wow.
Common cold's
So
about 2.5 microns across.
yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
so these
So
worms start out
microscopic,
really
Hmm
tiny. Gotcha. Okay.
incredibly tiny.
It's about 1/60th the width of a human hair.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I think
You're not seeing that.
yeah. No.
Yeah, no.
All right.
So, that spore form is kind of their dispersal and environmental resistance stage, probably. Like there's a lot of like spore forming bacteria, the spores of fungi that can persist in inhospitable environments for a long time. And this is kind of where the author, I think, may have gotten the idea of it being a pioneer species. The problem is it's not making the habitat like suitable for other things like subsequent in a like succession process. Um, it's basically waiting around and opportunistically preying on a disturbance, like preying on the aftermath of a disturbance, effectively.
Yeah, and
Um,
they are super ravenous. They eat
yes,
everything.
like reading this, it almost kind of sounds like this is a species that like it takes advantage of perturbations in climax communities. So when you have something like say a tsunami that comes in,
Mhm.
succession is not what they're doing. But you get a lot of wounded animals, you get a lot of scavengers, you get a large concentration of prey items that are going to be in the general vicinity, kind of recovering after that event. Or any other kind of like disturbance of that nature that doesn't sterilize the habitat.
Right.
And that's when this thing probably like starts doing its thing. Um, and those little parasitic worms, like when you think about it, when in their second stage, once they've infected a host, I don't know how they get into the host. Is it do they go through the skin? Or are they breathed in? How does that work?
They go through the skin.
Okay,
Um,
so they just burrow in like hookworms. Okay, neat. So now what they're doing in that stage is they're doing a rapid amplification process. The longer they can keep a host alive, the more of themselves they can make. And they're basically just reproducing at that point by by asexual reproduction, just dividing, grow, divide, grow, divide, grow, divide, like a bacterium. In this respect, they have less in common with most parasitic worms, and more in common with like just pathogenic bacteria. And they're probably about the same size, but worm form. They're more like spirochetes or protozoa. Yeah, they're probably more like protozoal parasites in that respect, like malaria.
they do get
So
bigger than that towards the
the
end
worms do.
stage. Yes.
Okay, so the worms actually like grow in addition to just reproducing over and over again.
Yeah. Um,
Huh. Okay.
yeah. Now, to be fair, they don't get like super large, but they get large enough to form that cyst, and then they hatch into the kraken, which is uh in its
You know what that
first.
reminds me of? The guinea worm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
are parasitic worms that will form cysts under the skin of humans, and they will eventually burrow their way out in order to get back to the water, which is usually a vector for a lot of these parasites. If I remember that
Yeah.
correctly, right,
Yeah.
Ben?
The
Or right,
guinea
Dr.
worm.
Allen?
Yeah, the guinea worm likes to, which by the way is almost extinct now.
Yep.
Thank heavens. What they do, I'll talk about their life cycle as a sort of as a little thing. So what they do is they start off their life free living on the water. They get eaten by Daphnia, which are little tiny crustaceans about the size of what's a good size? Like coffee grounds, basically. Yeah, about the size of coffee grounds. They get inside them. They reproduce, asexually in there, if I recall properly, and then they just wait. And the people who live in these areas, mostly sub-Saharan Africa, just go down to the pond. They get their drinking water. They drink the water. Goes into their gut. Then the worms get into the bloodstream and eventually find their way to the legs, where they then proceed to just be there, not in a cyst form, but they kind of poke themselves out to lay their eggs whenever the human goes to drink water. Just once they wade to do laundry, whatever, lay their eggs, and then they go back inside once the human steps out of the water again. This is probably where what is I forget if the Asclepius is the other one. The snake in the rod. What I forget what that symbol is called.
Oh, the staff of
Caduceus.
Aaron. Yeah, the
The staff of
caduceus.
Aaron or the caduceus. It's why it's a snake-like thing wrapped around a stick, because the only way to remove these things for the longest time was literally to grab hold of the female as it's hanging out under the surface of the skin and slowly pull it out, wrapping it around a stick, sometimes in a process that can take weeks to get this thing out. It's quite long. And the worm is incredibly painful and causes a lot of inflammation and edema and swelling. It's bad. But you can filter them out with just pantyhose, basically. So you filter out the crustaceans, and they can no longer reproduce. So cool beans. That's why they're almost eradicated now. But that's kind of what these things remind me of, is something like that.
And that requires an established community, not a
Yep.
not a pioneer situation where the community's been removed. Again, this sounds more opportunistic scavenger, that kind of thing. So
Now,
Opportunistic, like apex predator is how I would put it, because it's not scavenging on the dead; it's eating.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that both the Kraken and Dragon generation are born very small. Like, you could hold them in your hand, but they get large enough to swallow people whole. So there's an incredible growth rate here. And one of you mentioned to me before the video that almost sounded like an apex predator of sorts.
Oh, absolutely. And they're I don't know how long this lasts, but if it's lasting for a couple of weeks, this whole process maybe.
Yeah, the
months,
whole
maybe.
book takes place over a 30-day period from the infection to one of the dragon offspring reaching its later stages. I don't want to spoil anything in the book, but
So this doesn't actually sound like an apex predator to me personally, from my perspective. What this seems like is something that follows a much more boom-bust cycle, where apex predators a lot of times take longer to mature and they've got a more stable population. This seems highly unstable. So, you know what this actually sounds more like? It's like locusts, possibly, or something similar, where it doesn't have to be an apex predator to completely upend a biosphere or a trophic web, the food web of a local area. So it ends up being able to prey on most things, but apex predators a lot of times are very stable, longer lived, and they usually live in some kind of equilibrium with their prey species. This is burning itself out like a highly infectious virus or even some sort of weird fungal, bloom. I mean, heck, I'm seeing elements of algal bloom. So like the red tide that blooms in the Gulf of Mexico follows a similar kind of life cycle, actually, where it goes through stages where it's able to reproduce asexually, reproduce sexually. It even has an amoeboid stage where it forms something that is like a giant cell that's bigger than most human cells. And it will directly attack fish and cause lesions on their bodies. So yeah, this is behaving more like something along those lines. But
Yeah,
again,
no, you're not wrong. And the problem is it has a complicated life cycle. So I
yeah,
think like that dragon stage is more apex predator esque, even though if it's short lived. But it's sort of bottlenecked by its own reproductive cycle. It can't actually like be long lived. It's sort of ecologically constrained in that respect.
It does seem to have a very accelerated life cycle compared to
Yeah,
what I'm used to.
like it's feeding, growing, and then reproducing in an environment that is temporary, and so it locally becomes the like highest trophic level in that area, but only for 30 days. Um, at which point the community is likely to stabilize. There's less prey around, and so they have to go into their dormant cycle again.
Yeah, and I will note that there are some species on Eden that are observed to prey on the immature versions of both species, but again, uh, the scientists in the book don't have a lot of time to do an in-depth survey before. Oh gosh, there's a bunch of these loose on our space station eating people. We need to figure out how to get rid of them now.
Yeah, that's not a good thing to have on your space station.
No.
Honestly, like a lot of this, like the ecology of this planet doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But
yeah.
no, I could talk about the biochemistry for a while.
Well, I that's
But
that's something. If you do want to send me something on that, we can talk about it, but I don't want to get too into the weeds on this video. Let's put it that
no,
way.
that's
Yeah.
fair and reasonable. That's an
I
entirely
I
separate
think
discussion.
Dr. Allen and I kind of both could probably come to the same agreement about this, even if we're disagreeing a little bit on the nitty gritty of classifying some of these terms.
Yeah, we're
That
not
what
fundamentally
it
in disagreement about what this organism
no,
does.
we just the nitty gritty. It's science. That's what we do. But I think we could both agree pretty heavily on this that the author probably had a cool idea, probably heard about a number of really neat species on Earth and some really cool strategies that are employed right here on Earth by a number of different organisms. And then kind of took all of it, put it in a blender, shook it up, and much like a delicious, lasagna and a side salad, if you put them into a blender, shook it up, and ground it all up into a fine smoothie, it wouldn't be nearly as delicious and cool as the variety of life that we have here on Earth, trying to put it all into one thing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's I think a pretty perfect description
Um,
because we have
okay.
some beautiful, beautiful parasitic wasps on this planet. We've got
But yeah, I mean, I think it's that thing where it's like he's got a lot of cool ideas. He knows enough about it to use some of the terms, but it's a little bit of a maybe this idea needed to bake a bit longer.
yeah,
I
Yeah,
mean, okay, and I will say this to the writer: if you feel these guys have got it wrong, that's my fault. Please feel free to reach out to me,
yeah.
and if you wanna, if you wanna sit down and have your say, I will be happy to do that for you, sir. Um,
And again, having not read the story, I'm not evaluating the book there. I'm just saying, from what I can see, there's a couple gaps here, and it's a cool concept, but I think that from what I can see here, there's a there's a little bit of a difference in how we're viewing this. And again, having not read the book, I'm not critiquing the writing. I'm just saying this doesn't sound like what we know from bio.
yeah,
yeah.
I will
Now
say in
that
defense of the book, I thought it was a extremely well written horror story, and I did grade it highly on that. So
Oh
oh yeah,
hell
I
yeah!
mean always a good horror. One thing I did like, and at least in the description I have, is the way that the what is it, the Claude phase? Yeah, I'll call it the pincer phase can discombobulate its prey.
yeah,
So it has, it uses an electromagnetic field to like screw with brain function,
yeah,
and that's really cool. That's like taking some of the toxins that certain parasitic wasps use to like the next level.
It sounds actually a lot like electric eels.
Yeah.
They can actually emit a low level electric field to drive prey out of hiding. As well as it looks like they can use a system similar to the ampullae of Lorenzini, which are the sensory organs on the nose of sharks that let them detect where a electromagnetic field is, and electromagnetic fields are generated by most higher level neurons. So basically, if you've got something that has a nervous system, it's probably going to be generating a small electrical field, and certain organisms right here on Earth can pick that up and find it. Other organisms can actually mess with that. Like I said, the Amazon electric eel can use that actually to either completely stun or to just harass prey into the open. So
Yep.
yeah.
And they can all. I mean, they can go so far as to electrocute a caiman, but
Well, yes, they can actually. That's what I mean by completely stun. But
yes,
they can use it actually a lot like how a metal detector works by
yeah, which is
creating this field and then measuring how that field is changed when it interacts with other stuff, amping it up just a little bit to then basically give anything around them the tingles and drive it out of hiding without giving a full discharge. So
yeah, which would
really
be
cool.
uncomfortable. It is
Yeah.
really cool, and like the enjoying of the suffering of its prey, like that, like kind of journey into the like perceptual universe of a predator is interesting to me. So, uh,
Well,
you know,
I will see about getting you a copy of the book if you'd like, and if you
okay,
want to revisit it after reading, we can absolutely do that.
yeah,
Um,
like did my dogs enjoy the suffering of the cat that they like attacked the other day? I don't know.
well,
Interesting meditations.
yeah.
I
Um,
did not enjoy it.
I imagine you didn't. Just for the record, the cat is okay, folks, and Dr.
Yeah,
Allen
that's fine.
cooked that
Yeah.
cat to the vet. It is being cared for. So,
Yes, I
it
am not
just
a monster.
just
Um,
it was just an unfortunate incident. Um, that's why you want to keep your cats inside. I'm just gonna pitch that
Yeah.
out
for
there.
the love of
Yeah.
God, keep your cats inside.
Yeah,
Yes.
especially if you live in a predator-rich place like Dr. Allen does, or even if you don't, because cats themselves pose a lot of problems. But we're going off into the weeds. I
All right.
apologize. Let's go ahead and wrap it up here, guys. So,
Okay.
any ending thoughts you'd like to share with the audience?
Um. So I feel like again, yes, I could definitely see there being a form of succession occurring with regular tidal waves, things like that, highly disturbed environments. But pioneer species typically are going to be your organisms that are able to rapidly colonize an area. And the reason why they're called pioneer species is usually because they establish themselves and they actually set up for the next stages of succession, either by building up soil, even in areas where you have soil still there. They build up a biomass into the soil, which helps keep moisture in it. They help the process of turning that soil over and setting it up for other seeds to be able to germinate. And many of them actually do important things like fixing nitrogen and stuff like that. What would be cool would be finding out that this thing is super important because the way that it breaks things down is because it can eat anything from any of the lineages, and it's able to basically produce a bunch of free nitrates and phosphates, which are the base building blocks that any of these biochemistries would need. So
Yeah,
maybe there, but beyond that, I don't know.
yeah. See, that's the part that doesn't make much sense to me. Is everything should be able to eat everything else unless it has like opposed chirality problems. Um, just because, if it's constructing a protein, if you have different proteins than me, I should be able to still construct a protein that breaks down your proteins. That should not be a problem. Um,
Not
but what I'd be interested,
necessarily, because if the individual amino acids are different enough, you might not be able to use them, or the proteins may actually be toxic in some ways.
they could be like there's
And
that possibility, but like
there is the chirality problem there. And then also, if you have different base pairs than the ones on Earth, they may code for entirely different amino acids that aren't. It's not just a chirality problem. The amino acid isn't broken down to the base components, but it can't be reassembled into other stuff either.
Right.
So
And yeah. See, I'm looking at it like it's just a different coding system. Which
yeah,
and
it's
it could be more than that, which would
yeah.
be interesting if
I
they're
mean, hell,
using
literally it
different.
could be AC versus DC kind of thing here. So
It
not
could
just
be, but
coding,
Right.
the
it could
BIOS
be,
is
but
Well,
wired different.
I'm going to
yeah,
stop
but
you guys here before we go too deep into the
yeah, we
weeds,
Sorry.
because
right. Again,
we
we're
do
we're
have
hyper
a
nerds.
yeah.
So
So
the one
Dr.
thing,
Allen, your final thoughts, please.
so one thing I would be interested in is to see if these things exist in other disturbed environments, not just areas that are subject to periodic tidal waves. Because the way I would look at this is you've got an ecosystem, say mangrove swamp, that is subject to periodic, highly kinetic inundation like tsunamis, right? That ecological community is probably adapted to just face tanking that. But the surrounding communities see it as have it as an opportunity, right? So you've got some disturbance, they come in, they do their thing, and then they get preyed upon by this thing. But my question is, like, what's triggering those spores to go into their active phase if they're just hanging out between tsunamis? Is it the saline inundation? Are they activated by that like that way? I mean, that would be my thought there. But then, is there an analog or even the same species in other disturbed environments? That would be interesting to me.
Oh yeah.
I would want to go to this planet with a better environment suit and probably end up like that one guy in Prometheus. But
Remote operated vehicles have been exploring the ocean since,
I am
1983.
aware, but I know, and we would have
I'm
to use the ROVs. I'm not insane, but I am the sort
yeah.
of person who is going to probably die petting something I shouldn't. So,
Well, all biologists should carry a poking stick, and this just further proves it. So you just need a longer
yes,
poking stick.
yes, I need a
Okay.
longer poking stick.
On that note, I am going to stop us right here. Um, I would like to thank my guest here for being with us. Just real quick, I hope everyone found this video as informative and entertaining as I did listening in on these guys. And I would also like to just give a shout out to Big Steve, my biggest Patreon supporter, as
Thank
well
you,
as
Steve.
Thanks,
as
Steve.
as well as thanking Mr. Davis for being a Patreon, and I also want to thank Dr. Davis for many
Dr. Allen.
years. Excuse me, I said Dr. Davis again, didn't I?
Look,
Yep.
it's fine. His dad, the actual Dr. Davis, basically helped raise me. It's fine.
What about the
Okay.
other Dr. Davis?
There's
Mrs.
both
Dr. Davis?
both Dr. Davises helped raise me.
Oh,
I would rather have their last name than
okay.
mine. It's fine.
Dr. Allen was my editor for many years, and I am just going to go ahead and, for the record, say thank you for those years of support, Doc. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
you're
Um,
welcome.
and we're going to end the video here. Folks, I hope to see you next week, where we're going to get into actual lost cities. Should be a fun topic. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.